Dr. Daniel Harner, welcome to the world's best trauma recovery podcast.
It's an honor to be with you. And it's an honor to be on your podcast. And you are one of the kindest and gentlest and most radiant people I've ever met. So I'm looking forward to our time together.
Thank you. What a wonderful beginning of my podcast. We didn't plan that, but thank you so much, Daniel. I really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
And my first question for you, Daniel, what is your definition of trauma?
So my definition is pretty broad because I call myself a psycho-spiritual mentor. And in my former life, I was a psychologist, and I added really strong spiritual components to the way I work with people, because that's how my own transformation happened in my own life. So if I talk about trauma, I talk about trauma from a psycho-spiritual perspective, which might sound a little bit different than just a purely psychological interpretation of it. So how I see trauma is that it occurs on multiple levels, and on a biological level, on an energetic level, on an emotional level, a mental level, and on a spiritual level simultaneously for most people. Okay, and then how it's all kind of connected and wired up, and it's different for everybody. So there's very unique flavors in how trauma expresses itself in someone's unique body and life and story. But I see it as a real disconnect from a genuine presence within. Whenever it's almost like taking a lamp and unplugging it, and it doesn't turn on anymore. And then you try to turn yourself on, but it just doesn't seem to work because you've been disconnected. So trauma for me equates to disconnection, and healing trauma for me equates to reconnecting. Very simplistically said, meaning also reconnecting to source, reconnecting to being, reconnecting to that energy that flows through all of us, and reconnecting to that source that moves everything. And once we are disconnected from that source, then we are not feeling like we are ourselves. We feel like there's something wrong with us, because we keep trying to turn ourselves on, but something just seems to be amiss. So for me, that's a way how I see trauma. Another way how I like to see trauma is frozenness. It's also like frozen energy. So when you're, let's say, a river, a river flows and it's beautiful. And when a river is frozen, it's stuck. And then when it snows, the snow accumulates on top of on the ice. And that's kind of how experience is. When you have trauma, you experience life, and the snowflakes kind of keep piling up and piling up and piling up. So it's like you have a backlog of experience the longer you live, since you experienced trauma, whatever age that was. So it's really about melting and unfreezing, so that ice and the snow can melt back into the river of life. Okay. So for me, trauma is kind of frozen energy, so it's kind of melting, so you can flow back into the nature of how things are on the deepest level.
What an amazing definition. I've never heard this before.
Mm.
Thank you, Daniel. And it's so clear. And that's exactly how I felt about my trauma. Why is it so important to heal our traumas?
When you are experiencing a trauma, you're experiencing a disconnection from life. When you're disconnected from life, then you can't experience life anymore. So you're really in some way a zombie. Okay, you're kind of like semi-consciously alive, which makes you feel like I'm just going through the motions and things aren't quite as alive, or things are not making me feel a certain way. There's just something missing. So if you ever want to have genuine intimacy with people, with yourself, in your spirituality, in work, you have to diminish the burden of trauma in your life, because the more trauma, the less intimacy you have with everything. So for me, it's also like there's a proportional relationship to intimacy. So intimacy is really what makes us feel like we're connected, right? So the less trauma I have, the more intimate I am, the more connected I am. So if you want a high quality of life, it's wise to work on those parts inside of you that haven't come alive yet, that still feel frozen, that still feel unwelcomed in this world. So, and it's an ongoing process to keep unfreezing you and keep unfreezing you and keep unfreezing you, so you can join more, You can sing more, you can dance more, you can talk more, you can express your creativity more. So trauma is really a joy killer. Trauma is really a freezer. Trauma will inhibit you to not to kind of remain silent, and it will keep people stuck. It will keep people feel like at the end of their life, they might look back and they feel like, oh my God, I haven't done what I needed to do. That's all trauma. Yeah. So that's why I think it's so important, because without trauma, there's with trauma, there's no life. Yeah.
Daniel, you know what? I can resonate with that. Before I started my own healing journey, yes, I was going to university, I was driving my car, then going to work, walk my dog out. Like the life was going pretty normal. And outside, I looked like I have it all together.
Yeah.
But inside, I was a total mess. Total mess. I was so afraid to speak up. I was
Mm,
so afraid to ask for help. Even the simple job interview, would be like a hell for me, because
mm,
I was trying to anticipate what sort of questions they're gonna ask me, what answer is correct or not correct. I was trying to please
mm,
people.
yeah.
It was so tiring. It was so exhausting.
Yeah.
And I know it took me literally 20 years to come to this point.
Mm,
Daniel, I know many people would have a trauma of any kind.
yeah.
Why do you think they are so afraid to look back and to start healing process?
It's a catch-22, because when you're traumatized, you kind of start seeing life through the lens of the past. So the reason why you wouldn't want to work on your trauma is because you are thinking that the trauma is going to happen again, right? So even if somebody comes with a medicine, like a spoonful of the most delicious medicine, they would heal your trauma, and you just have to put it in your mouth, you would think that's poison. So, and I call that being the wires being crossed in one's nervous system or in one's unconscious mind, because the medicine, the healing, the love has become an allergen or a pathogen or a toxin in your perception. So people will actually go out of their way to avoid healing and to run from those people that would actually be a bridge to the paradise, on the other side of this. So this is why it's so lonely to be in there, because it's really hard to break that pattern.
Daniel, I was holding so much guilt and so much shame after what happened to me when I was sexually abused by my stepfather when I was 15 at the first time. And I remember when everything started, I got frozen. I couldn't say a word. I literally became a mummy that couldn't move. And then I was beating myself up for so many years. You were 15 years old. You knew what was happening. Couldn't you just yell, scream, jump, do something? How would you explain what was happening with me?
Well, and your innate trust in life has been broken. So at that point, since you couldn't move out anymore with your life energy, you had to kind of just do this sort of circuitous repetition inside of yourself for harming yourself or making yourself wrong, like blaming yourself, judging yourself, because what was stuck inside of you, you kind of want to spit it out in a way. It's like a toxin, but you can't, because you feel like I cannot spit it out. I can't let it go. So I have to kind of regurgitate it and kind of re-expose myself inside to the trauma until I'm ready to kind of move it out of me. So that's something we all go through, our bottoms, how long we hold on to pain and trauma and grief and sadness and anger. We all have different bottoms, like when do we let it go? But some people let it go quickly. Animals, for example, can let it go immediately when the trauma happens, right? Because they don't have this sort of thing of locking everything in like humans have, right? They sometimes just discharge it right away when something difficult happens, but we humans have a tendency to just make it a lot more complex, because how our neurology works and how our brains work is much more sophisticated. So yeah, so you were just doing what everybody else is doing, and it's not a personal reaction at all. It's really a collective trauma response is really something everybody has built in, so you were just doing what everybody else would have been doing if they would have experienced what you experienced, just you with your unique flavors and your own biography and all that. But It's very, very normal to go through this process. And that's, I think, what you were doing. You tried to heal yourself the best way you could until you found a way how to do it actually better. And then you were healing on a deeper level, right? So, but in the beginning, self-hatred and blaming yourself and all that is actually the best attempt at healing ourselves. That's the truth. Even though it sounds really bitter.
Daniel, what would be your advice to someone who is immeasurably suffering from sexual abuse trauma right now?
Well, since most traumas, including sexual trauma, have been experienced in a relational context, meaning like with another person, so trauma is kind of stored in an interrelational sort of matrix. So meaning like trauma is also then best healed when you are back in a relationship with somebody that is trustworthy. So I would, for anybody who has been through trauma, relational trauma, sexual trauma, I think it's a very important thing to be in the presence of somebody that you can repattern and repair this innate trust again inside of you. And that's going to be, first of all, as one challenge, number one is finding that person that you actually want to build a relationship with, somebody that you feel safe with, somebody that might be triggering you a little bit, but not so much that you will be too overloaded with feelings of not being safe and secure in that container. So my advice to anybody with sexual trauma would be to really find somebody that just calls to your soul, where you feel like, I love that person, I feel safe with that person, I think that person can help me, and just give it a try. Okay, because I don't think we are meant to heal trauma just inside of ourselves on our own. I think there's so much you can do on yourself, work with yourself, reading books and going to nature and taking care of your body and meditating. And those are all wonderful tools. But the most powerful tool is to be vulnerable in the context of an interpersonal relationship, in a therapeutic relationship, or in a coaching context that allows those things to come to the surface. And you don't have to carry it all alone anymore. There's somebody there that can carry it with you. You can be in the same space together, and it's 50% easier to move it through and move it out and heal. So this is just my experience. And there's resistance usually from doing this, but sometimes the pain gets just so much that you feel like I have to keep looking for someone I trust. So, and I've worked with, I don't know, in the beginning of my career, I thought, I wasn't sure about the statistics of sexual abuse, because sometimes you read like it's one out of 3 women or so have experienced this. So but when I started working as a therapist early in my career, I saw so much of it that it was actually stunning to me. I thought like, wow, this is very, very, very amazing. I actually didn't think that was a possibility, but it actually was. I've worked with so many females and males, but mostly females with sexual abuse, that I feel honored. I feel honored that I had a privilege to help so many young and amazing women heal and build trust again as a male. So yeah, I'm surprised how endemic this problem. And there's lots of help needed in our culture on many levels to repair this damage that has been done. It's very, 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 very toxic.
Well, Daniel, when I started my own podcast, I haven't realized how many people are out there who have never ever told their stories.
Wow.
And there are so many consequences from suffering in silence. What some of the common effects of not healing trauma have you seen from your experience as a psychologist?
Yeah, well, internally you'll recognize it as a very poor self-image, with body, with feelings, with your thoughts. It's very internal dialogue. Self-dialogue is very, very demeaning, so it's just like very shame-based, very judgmental, and there's a lot of pain being constantly created by that loop inside of ourselves that just constantly blames you, judges you, talks lots of fear and anxiety and worry and inability to form relationships. So that's what it looks like on the inside. On the outside, it looks often like an either overexpression of what happened to you in terms of like looking for the same looking for similar patterns again on the outside that will bring that memory closer to you. So you look for people that are actually untrustworthy in relationships again, or do similar things that cause a trauma. And then so it becomes a repetition compulsion, they call it, right? So you feel like you came putting myself in the same problem situation over and over again and expecting a different result, but it's the same thing's going to happen over and over again until you kind of wake up on the inside and say, hey, you know what, I'm doing this to myself, right? And the other way how I can look is an avoidance pattern of people really isolating and not forming any human relationships ever again, and just isolating and becoming either monks or nuns or like or just very secluded people. And it's usually the two responses, either an overexpression or an underexpression of that pattern, right? So but what you always have is a diminished self-esteem and a poor body image, and the self-esteem that just goes into the basement.
I know how it feels,
Yeah.
honestly. I
Yeah.
went through all of this and I've been suffering from it.
Hmm.
Perfectionism, negative self-talk, lowest self-esteem, and ending up in a toxic relationship again and again and again, not believing in myself, not trusting myself.
Hmm.
I honestly thought this is the way how everyone lives. This is the way how I supposed to be. It's nothing to do with my trauma.
Yeah.
I was so wrong. Daniel, and how is your journey began?
Yeah, mine is different because mine wasn't one event. So for me, um, I was never exposed to like one thing that messed me up. So they were like, oh yeah, this is what my mom did, or this is what my dad did, or something like that. For me, it was really like a deep sense of disconnection at some point in my life, and I don't know when. At some point in my life, my wires got crossed. So at some point, I felt like this is not what it's supposed to be. Like this is weird. I didn't feel at home in the world. And I do remember that being the case when my mom dropped me off in kindergarten. And I felt so unsafe. I felt like I don't want to go. I don't want to go into this new environment. That's when I first have a memory of really experiencing like stress of separation, like stress of feeling like I don't know if this experience is too much for me. So it's like wires kind of like getting blown out in my nervous system. So I do remember that being a pretty pivotal event for me. And I've had that sensation of separation anxiety as a child, like really strongly. So re-experienced it later when I went to martial arts practice as a kid, and then my dad dropped me off, and I couldn't bear the thought of my dad not being there watching me. So I couldn't think of like, what if my dad's not going to watch me? Where is he? Is he still going to be there if he leaves? So I had this sort of insecure attachment as a child. And I think that was a huge question mark in my life. Like, I always wondered, like, these feelings are strong. Like, why am I feeling this way? And it ultimately led me to the study of psychology, because I wanted to find a way of healing myself from this. So this was a feeling of deep internal loneliness and separation. And it had a lot of psychological overtones, but also a lot of spiritual overtones as well, because I did feel like I lost my connection with source and God in a way that really, really disrupted me, because I think I was a very spiritual child, and I was very in tune with like God being beautiful, nature being beautiful, my parents being amazing. And at some point I felt like I'm in the wrong story, and I have to protect myself in that story because something might happen that would make me feel unsafe. So so that was very, very powerful, but it was also an amazing motivator for me to become a psychologist and for me to become a very spiritual person. So what I did when I was young, I became the isolator. So I protected myself. I was in my room most of the time. I studied hard. I became very spiritual and very internally focused, and developed an amazing amount of self-discipline and control. So I was yeah, I was just purpose driven. I wanted to be really good at my work, being a psychologist, and being advancing my consciousness and personally improving myself became almost like an addiction to me, because I felt like that's where I have control, and it will also be a means of freeing myself again. So that's a little bit of my story. There's a very spiritual overtones of feeling separate from God, but also feeling separate from my parents, and feeling separate as a child from the love that surrounded me. So I kind of at some point lost love as an experience within me, and I became very romantic early on in my life. As a child, felt like, oh, I wrote love letters to women, and became like, felt like, which was beautiful, but it always had this sense of like, oh, something beautiful lives out there, like something beautiful lives out there. It's not quite an internal alive reality within myself. So that made me very poetic, and made me very romantic, and maybe because I'm a very sensitive person, and very, very vulnerable, and very attuned to feelings. So that gave me that part of me, so whether one was more the masculine side of kind of very driven and purpose driven and discipline focused, and the other one was very like feeling and like and longing and poetic. Like, it's just living in those two worlds. And really, for me to heal the trauma inside of me, it was really bringing those two qualities inside of me together. Like the one part that drives hard and is always like pretty strong, like Batman, and the other part that's really vulnerable and kind of small and kind of incomplete in a way, and needing protection and needing help and needing affection and needing reassurance. So for me, it was super, super important, like a daily spiritual practice, to bring those two parts together. It's like dating myself. It's like, okay, I'm dating myself. It's okay, I might not be dating anybody out there, but I'm dating myself every day. I'm creating a love relationship with me. And that's been for me the most important spiritual practice throughout my whole life.
This is amazing, Daniel. So many people would have a fear of separation, and they would always diminish their experience. But you can't compare your experience with anyone. And Daniel, I'm just wondering, who would be ideal partner for Dr. Daniel Harner?
It's two aspects to it. Okay, one would be like the dream version, so it's like, is that going to be a romantic fantasy? Like, is that a dream, or is that a reality? I don't know. That's the mystery I live in right now at the moment, where I feel like, okay, at least I can express what I want, at least I can be clear about what I desire. Is that person out there? Maybe not. Maybe I'm just describing a feminine version of Daniel. Maybe there is no such thing, and maybe that person wouldn't even be the person that I'm going to be in love with. So in that mystery, I'm currently living every day. Where I feel like, okay, I'm opening my heart, I'm available, and I'm looking for somebody that's very, very soft and kind and gentle and loving, and somebody who has in some ways a similar life story to mine, a feeling like honoring the heart very deeply, honoring the heart's desire very deeply, and also knowing that life has been a preparation for a big love. It's not just oh, I'm going here, I'm going there, I'm going there, I'm going there. It's more like, no, you're preparing yourself for somebody special. Okay, it's like somebody that's kind of like a somebody you're gonna match up with on many levels. So like spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and physically. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be a very, very strong compatibility there. And that's really the space I'm holding for the woman that's going to come into my life. So and let's be somebody that has walked through heartbreak. It has to be somebody that's recovered from trauma, because it's important. It's important to know how to be traumatized, but to have the experience of being traumatized. And
Resonates. Mhm.
yeah, for sure. And then also somebody who's really good within the child work, because for me, I needed to become very good at working with children, and especially my inner child. So it's like reconnecting with, yeah, a young version of me that kind of got lost along the way in my journey. So, and for my wife or partner or companion, whatever we shall call her, she'd have to speak both languages, right? She'd have to speak the language of the heart, and also some ways is language of the mind. So that's what I do, and that's what I try to translate in my work all the time. It's what I call kind of psycho-spiritual. So she'd have to kind of understand me in a certain way. She doesn't have to understand me completely, but you'd have to understand the vulnerability that I have on the inside, and also my strength. and she'd have to bring out the best in me, and I'd have to bring out the best in her. So it have to be a win-win scenario, otherwise it's not worth doing, you know. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's describes it a little bit. Yeah.
You've answered my question perfectly.
Perfect.
And the reason I've asked this question is because what I believe
Mm-hmm.
that when we know exactly what we want, the universe will create it for you. That's what I did when I wrote the list of my ideal partner, that
Mm-hmm.
he's very loyal, very honest, very kind,
Mm-hmm.
has an amazing sense of humor.
Oh God,
I
I know
even
someone like
described,
that. Yeah.
yeah, I even described how he looked like. A week and a half
Wow.
later, he stopped me on the street, and I knew exactly that he was my person. It was just this instant connection. It works with everything, with your career of your dreams,
Hmm.
with the life of your dreams, with everything. Daniel, who is the person that inspires you the most?
Well, the person that inspires me the most is me, because that's the person I need to get to live with day in and day out. So I inspire myself the most because I'm also the most challenging person that I've ever met. So for me to go into the own depth of my own psyche and my own mind is a discovery every day. And I don't have a recipe for it, how to decipher it. So for me to be with myself is at this point the most interesting person to be with. So, but that being said, it'd be nice to share my life intimately with somebody that is as interesting, if not more interesting than I am. So, and I also want to say that I'm very privileged to have had amazing teachers in my life that were guiding lights on my journey, that revealed parts of myself to me over and over again. Now starting with David Hawkins and Carl Jung and William Tiller, Nathan Swartzeland, Steve Hardison. Like I've been surrounded with the most brilliant minds that I could dream into being, and I've been exposed to them over very prolonged periods of time and had very intimate connections with them. So I've had people that inspired me very deeply, but at the end of the day, I always have to come back to me and ask myself what, because I can't copy anybody out there, even though there might be the most amazing mentors. At the end of the day, I got to be in love with me and translate what their gifts are into how that comes through me. So at the end of the day, I'm creating myself through their lens, and I'm a masterpiece. I'm an artwork. I'm the artwork that I'm creating. This is my life. So that's for me the most interesting thing.
Wow, you've had some amazing life, Daniel.
Extremely blessed and privileged. Yeah.
And I'm so blessed to know you. And I'm
Thank
just
you.
wondering, in your opinion, what makes a coach a good coach?
Yeah. Well, that's a very good question, and I love it. I love the question because it's something I've asked myself over and over again, both as a giver and also as a receiver. Like who is it? Who's somebody that I like to learn from, and who do I want to be when I'm with the person? Me being in the helper role, right? So I think, first of all, you have to be your number one priority. So if you're a coach, you gotta be willing to go to meet yourself, right? Because you gotta know yourself, who you are. If you don't have that, then you're always going to be giving blindly. Okay, so that's rule number one. It's like, know who you are, get your own coach, get your own therapist, do your own healing, like really be who you are. That's number one. That's the being component that's most important. So you got to be who you are as a person. So second are like multiple qualities, but I just name a few. So as a really good coach, you have to be an amazing listener. Like listening is underrated. Listening is way underrated. So if you want to be a good coach, you have to really learn how to slow down to your own internal reality, and you have to be able to slow down to the other person's reality. Because if your mind is faster than the other person's reality, you're not going to be really listening. Okay, you might be listening with your ears, but not with your subtle senses. So you got to be present. You got to be really, really, really present. So especially for trauma, because when a person talks, when they have trauma, they're going to talk to you in 2 different ways, or 3 different ways, or 5 different ways, because their experience is fragmented inside of themselves. So when you're listening, you have to kind of listen with 5 ears sometimes, or 3 or 2, and then you have to kind of, the person might want to just communicate one channel to you, but you have to say, well, I heard you say this, but I also heard you say that, and I also heard you say that. You bring those 2 or 3 things together, and the person has an integrated experience, and it's a healing. So I'm just saying, listening is underrated. Listening is extremely important. And I think the space you hold and the love that you have inside of your being as a result of the work that you've done is the most transformational force. So imagine, like, I have like 15 PhD degrees, it's like, okay, I've only one from a university, but like I have learned a lot of things. I've learned a lot of things, and I've integrated those things. I've broken those things down. I've ingested those things. I've digested those things. They've become part of my cellular matrix. So everything that I've learned, every experience that I've had, every trauma that I've worked through is also inside of me as a healing for the person that I am with. So it's like a silent thing. I don't have to say that, but everything I've learned is transmitting to a person that I'm with, right? So that most people don't get that because they can't see it, but it's like, no, when you're with a person, you feel like, wow, I get the space that person is in. That person has gone through this challenge and that challenge, and it's like, it's almost like you build inner wealth. It's an invisible wealth. It's like an invisible kingdom. So if people could see the invisible kingdom, mine, that they start crying. If people saw what you created, what you have done, the work that you've done, like what it took for you to be here right now, is like people would start crying. So with everybody, if we really saw into each other's realities, we'd become very humble and very touched, because we don't know what people's stories are and what pain people have walked through to be where they're at. Well, to be where I'm at this point, like, taking me everything, literally everything. So that's important quality of a coach. It's like, this all goes into the equation. Right? And then, of course, there's reliability, trustworthiness, impeccability. Then there's a way how you communicate. Are you communicating clearly? Are you consistent? Are you? So but they're all more like not as important, but still important facets as well. Yeah, and I think another one is extremely important is switching gears. So you have to be able to switch gears. You cannot just be in one gear all the time and drive the car that way as a healer. If you want to be a really good healer or coach or therapist, then you have to be able to switch gears, because people are going to be in different gears at different times, and they'll have different needs in different stages of their development. So if you want to really guide somebody in multiple ways, you'll have to be able to shift. Sometimes you might be the kindest mom. Sometimes you might be the kindest dad. Sometimes you might be getting really intense and wake somebody up. It's just like you have to be willing to dance with the movement.
I love it. Thank you so much, Daniel. I'm becoming a coach, and your advice is so amazing and profound. Daniel, I'm just wondering, I remember my fear of not being able to find a good psychologist, a
Mm.
good therapist, and I didn't know what to look for. I was literally just pointing, my finger into the sky and just guessing.
Yeah.
Uh, took me like 5 people
Yes.
to get a good psychologist.
Mm.
I was like, I'm just wondering, if people finally decide, yes, I want to start my healing journey,
Yeah.
what can they expect from this session, and how to find a good therapist?
Yeah. Well, for me as a subject, for me as an experience of therapy, I resonate with your story, because for me, it's like, I am very picky, and it took me until I was probably 29, 30 years old until I finally found somebody that I really wanted to be with and really, really wanted to work with. And that was a relief. Okay. Because before, I felt I was under this predicament that I felt like, I don't know if there's anybody out there, and I don't find any people that I resonate with. And it's like all that lonely thing. It's just like, I don't know if there's anyone like me. It's like, can I talk to somebody that's just really speaks my language? So when I was 30 years old, I finally found somebody, and he was a Jungian analyst, and he was the best analyst since Carl Jung. And I resonated with him so deeply and so profoundly that I experienced healing of traumas that I didn't even know that I had. So it's almost like the lesson appears when you find the teacher. So I found a teacher, and then I found like, oh my God, I have so much inside of me that I didn't even know I had. I actually didn't even quite have a full understanding what trauma was up until I was 30 years old. Even though I learned it in school, and even though I had kind of an idea what it was, but to really like be thrown into it, it's just like, oh my God, like I had no idea. This is intense. Like this is really distorting my way I see the world, and this is distorting the way I think and everything. It's like, wow, this is an amazing experience. So I would say for people, depends. It's like from 0 to 100. There's every flavor out there of therapists and ages and genders and orientations. It's the Wild West. Okay, so I would say trust your heart. Trust your heart. Don't give up. Keep looking until you find somebody where you feel like in that presence I can relax, and I feel like there's hope around somewhere. I feel like that person gets me. If you feel seen, heard, and held by that person's presence, that's very, very good. Initial anxiety might be normal, but there's a deeper sense inside of you that will tell you this is where I want to go. So, and then when I found my first therapist, this was such a strong experience because I talked myself out of it in my mind. I thought like, this is too expensive, and I don't know, and da 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 da. But I kept coming up. It kept coming up. It kept coming up. So I thought like, okay, I'm going to do it. If it keeps coming up, I need to do it. It's like it's not an option. So what can people expect? It will depend on who you are being when you meet a therapist, and it also depends who that person is that you decide to work with. But I say be open and trust your heart, and you will go through. If that person is really, really good, it will take its time. It will take its time. So don't rush the process. Like be patient and test and trust yourself also when you feel like I don't want to do this anymore. It's like you feel like somebody is not honoring of who you are, and somebody doesn't quite get who you are, then tell them that it's not a fit and move on and find somebody else. Because the last thing you want to do is re-experience something that already has happened in the past. So remove yourself from situations that aren't healthy. And there's also therapists that have blind spots and are also not healthy. So it's important to know that not every therapist has gone through maturation in that sense, of their psyche. So yeah, I would say somebody also who's a little more experienced. It's important. So it's important to have somebody that's understands really what your history is and where you come from, and has a track record of healing conditions like that. So yeah, and you need to be committed to the process too. So you have to show up committed, because if you always have a foot out the door, then it will not work as well. So you have to. So I'm showing fully up with my therapist. I'm going to give this a try. Yeah.
100%. Believe that there is a therapist for you.
Mhm.
Trust yourself,
Yeah.
trust your gut, and do a bit of research.
Really.
Don't.
Well, contact Anna, like if you feel like I don't find anybody, like contact Anna. Like, so he's like, Anna, I need somebody. Do you know somebody? Like, or are you the one? Like, like just not to say that you're a psychologist, but you work with people that have similar stories that you have. So it's like, yeah, I mean, there's people everywhere. There's so many amazing people. So also just don't limit yourself just looking in one direction. Look in many different directions. Yeah.
Exactly. Ask for help,
Yeah.
ask for advice.
Anybody, yeah, ask like, do you know somebody? Like, be open, you'll find it 100%. If I could find it, everybody else will be able to find it, because I am the most picky person out there on the planet. So
Daniel, thank you so much. I just want to know how it felt when you were working with your mentors.
well, Carl Jung was a person that already died in 1962 or three, I don't remember. So he was my initiation to psychology and spirituality, in that sense of somebody who's understood both domains and made a connection between those two realities. So he was more like a spiritual grandpa. So he got me on the track. I felt like, okay, this is a soul brother for me. This is a guide. This is somebody that I deeply resonate with. So he set me on this journey to psychology. Um, so every one of my mentors was extremely different. So if you're asking me how it was for me to be with these mentors, I'd have to actually write a book, or a movie, or like have another podcast with you, and we could go through some of those. But I'll give you just a really brief synopsis. Okay. So being with David Hawkins was being like with a mystic. And so it was a transpersonal teacher. So there wasn't a personal element in his teaching. It was a teacher that helped you reconnect with spirit. So this was not a psycho-spiritual teacher. This was more of a spiritual teacher. Okay, it's more like somebody you look up to, and it's just transpersonal. It's not personal. It's not an unequal. It's like somebody you look up to. So that was David Hawkins. Very, very powerful. So amazing, 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 amazing person. Probably the most amazing person I've ever met. Yeah, yeah. So then, but that didn't mean like it was a complete experience for me, because I was still a young man growing up, and I needed to have a more personal experience of how to be in the world and how to embody myself in all of my qualities and parts. So for me, meeting my psychotherapist, my Jungian analyst, Nathan Swartz-Salat, was an amazing initiation, because he really reconnected me with the lineage of Carl Jung, because he was actually trained in Zurich as a Jungian analyst, and I was able to train with him. So I actually have only one person in between from him and Jung. So because he was trained by the people that Jung trained. So being with him was just the first experience of somebody who really understood the shadow and the darker elements of the alchemical process that goes on in healing, and all the trauma parts, and how to really bring him back into an embodied experience within myself. So he was an amazingly related person that was almost like clairvoyant, that could feel things. It's like, oh, you're right now leaving your body, like, like, try to come back, like, just like somebody who was really attuned and extremely grounded. Like I could feel like this guy is like the earth. So, and I was a little bit like ungrounded because I did so much spiritual work and I still had trauma. So I needed to have a grounding presence in my life. So he was that sort of like tree-like presence, heavy. It's like, felt good. It's like sometimes I just had his book in my under my bed covers just to sleep with it, because I felt like it was just, I need that energy so bad, so that was Nathan. Then I had Dr. William Tiller, who's a Stanford physicist and engineer, and he was a scholar in how human consciousness and intention relate to the physical world and how do they intersect. So he was the science mind behind human intentionality and how it relates to the physical universe. So with him, I could really explore the intersection between psyche, like the emotional domain, the mental domain, and how it affects the material universe. So we did research on distant healing experiments, for example, like one intention being sent over across the globe to different people and them receiving an intention and a healing that way. So I worked like for 3.5 years with him, and he was my doctoral supervisor, and we worked on helping autistic kids have a more embodied experience and coming back into integrated, fully sensory integrated experiences. So that was more like a academic relationship, but also very fruitful, because he was more like an engineer, scientist, quantum physicist. I was more like a psychologist. So it was a kind of cool intersection. He was looking for me, I was looking for him. We both found each other. So then I had a mentor called Ron Young, and Ron Young was amazing, because he reconnected me with my parents and my ancestry and my roots. He said, Daniel, you've been in America for so long, like you got to go home and see your parents and reconnect with them, because it's important that you see your mom and talk to your parents. So he was an amazing, amazing bridge when it comes for me to reconnect with deeper aspects within myself in that way. So amazing person, still alive. So you can still learn from him. So, and yeah, now Steve Hardison. Steve Hardison has been more like a dad, father, Christ-like person in my life that is represents the crown on a king's head, because he's really a mental master and a master of life. So, I'm privileged to be connected with him since 2015, and I'm currently still in a mentoring relationship with Steve. So very grateful for that. So that's just a brief overview of all the people I learned from. Thank you so much for asking about that. Not a lot of people do. They're priceless gifts in my life. So I always honor them very deeply and always reference them as big influences in my life, because without them I wouldn't be here.
Well, firstly, big shout out to Steve Hardison. I met him, and I can sign under every single word that you said about him, Daniel.
Mm.
You just showed me an importance to have a mentor in
Mm.
your life. Where people can find you?
Well, the best way to find me is on my website, which is danielharner.com. There's not a lot of information on there about me, but enough so you can get a small idea of what I do, the way I work, and stop by. And if you feel called, write me an email or text me. I'm available for conversations, and I love helping people, and I love especially helping people who are very sincere about their healing and their spiritual journeys. And I always love meeting fellow travelers. So if you feel called to reach out, please do so.
Amazing. Before we go, Daniel, do you have any concluding thoughts?
Yeah, I say whoever is listening to this podcast, I'm assuming they're listening to this podcast for a reason. So because either your journey or the guests that you have on are in some ways of interest to them. So if there is one thing I would like to leave the listener with, it's that you're not alone. You're not alone. Everybody carries pain in their hearts. Like the human experience is difficult, and don't do it alone. Like don't ask yourself what's wrong with me, and go through those internal tormenting processes. Like be connected to people that are a little bit further ahead than you are on your journey, on your healing journey, so you can bridge the isolation. The isolation is the hardest part about trauma, that you feel alone. So if you do find somebody in your life, then it will help tremendously to feel like you're getting like a 30 or 50% upgrade immediately, but just being connected to somebody you deeply feel like, okay, this is a good connection for me. It's like, it can be friends, it can be mentors, it can be coaches, it can be anything, but I would say please keep looking for the people that sing to your soul, that speak your same language, that you feel like are your tribe. And I'm so blessed at this point, because when I was 17, I had thought it was a dream that I'd be connected with the people that I'm connected with right now. And now these people are in my life and I get to share my life with them. It's like, this is happening. So if it can happen to me, it can happen to you too. So geez, just keep looking. If there's one thing I did repeatedly, is never give up on myself, and always kept looking for where's the next possibility for me. And that's the reason why I'm in America, because I knew there's going to be people from me here that I can learn from. So I always trusted that, even though it didn't make sense to the people around me, sometimes the decisions I made, it made sense to me in the long run, because otherwise I wouldn't be here right now. So trust yourself, trust your heart, follow your intuition, and don't give up, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. Just learn how to course correct and keep moving.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Daniel Harner.